We're live.
Hi, everyone. This is Ted Glutz with Innovative Computing Systems. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes for a few other folks to get registered, and then we will get started. And say registered, join us, that is. Hopefully they're not just registering now. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to give everybody just another minute. I still see the participant number running upwards, and then just one more minute to get logged in and signed up, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think I hit my magic number. Welcome, everybody. I'm Ted Glutz from Innovative Computing Systems, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us on our first ever security summit titled The State of Cybersecurity at Law Firms. It's really no secret that law firms, like any other business today, are struggling to keep up and manage security in the ever-changing landscape. At Innovative, we realized we had this tremendous depth of information and expertise on the topic from within our law firm clients, our partners, and from our own employees. We wanted to bring these experts to the table today to talk a little bit about the many facets of data security, and hopefully give all the legal professionals that have joined us a little better understanding. Today's webinar is a panel discussion. All attendees are on mute. However, you can ask any questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom. We're going to wait until the end of the panel discussion to answer your questions, but we promise we'll get to all of them. Fortunate today to have Steve Salkin as our moderator. Steve's an attorney and managing editor of ALM's Law Journal newsletters, including the Cybersecurity Law and Strategy newsletter. Steve has been covering legal technology for ALM for more than 15 years and also serves as a web editor for LJN. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks everybody for joining us. Just to give you kind of an overview of what we'll talk about, cybersecurity has been quite the hot topic, and it's probably a buzzword that everybody's talking about. And although it's not as sexy to report about as retail cyber breaches, law firms are as high a risk of cybercrime, if not more, as the data breaches they get the treatment in the daily news cycle, a 24-hour news cycle. Cyber thieves target law firms not for credit card or identity theft type of information that might be obtained from Target, Facebook, or Sears that you've heard about, but more for the data which law firms' clients share and entrust to their lawyers, intellectual property, trade secrets, and other confidential information. Law firms are an attractive target for another reason. They are traditionally slow to adopt new technology and typically less technically savvy than other businesses. As law firms become aware of the threat, helped by sessions such as this one, cyber thieves are reacting by making their attacks more sophisticated and trying to take advantage of the lack of sophistication of lawyers, paralegals, and assistants within the firm. The key to combat cyber threats for law firms is education, and we hope that this session today will help along with that. Our esteemed group of panelists will take you through the biggest cybersecurity risks to law firms, how to recognize and manage cyber threats through cyber insurance and due diligence, and increasing security requirements that clients are demanding. With us today on our panel, David Lamb is the Vice President, Technology Management Services at Citadel Information Group. Debra Gray, Executive Director of Frandzel Robbins Bloom. I'm sorry, a second, I just lost my place. Bloom and Csato, and President of the Greater Los Angeles ALA. Also Howard Miller, Senior Vice President of LBW Insurance and Financial Services, and Michael Kemps, Chief Executive Officer and Founder of Innovative Computing Systems. So first, I'm going to turn over to David. And David was going to take us through the major cybersecurity risks that exist today.
Thanks, Steve. The first risk we'll talk about are phishing and web attacks. Really the number one way that folks are getting into companies today is through email or phishing attacks, where we get an email that looks like it's coming from somewhere it should be coming from, but it's not. And the other way that folks get attacked is a web attack, meaning they just go to a website, that website's been compromised, and a malicious payload takes over someone's machine, and onto the rest of your network they go. Second major risk is hacking. Hacking is where someone's making a determined effort to get into your system. And this doesn't mean that these are professionals who are getting in. This could be someone who's just randomly scanning the internet to look and see, what vulnerabilities you might have available. And then they start going through their procedures that they can, look up on the web or buy tools on the web and just start hacking away. Third major risk, third-party vendors. A lot of folks are, putting their stuff in the cloud. These vendors are very different in the way that they approach security. Your backup solutions can be very different in what they're doing to protect your information, and it's absolutely critical that you're asking these third-party vendors what to do to protect your firm. As an example, in the Target breach that Steve referenced earlier, it was an air conditioning vendor that had inappropriate access that got into the Target system. And finally, regulation. You have to be aware of your obligations, your contractual obligations, and the regulations that are coming down the pike. For example, the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, goes into law on January 1st of next year, 2020. And this changes what you have to have in place to avoid potential fines and litigation.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to turn to Howard now. So how do those cyber risks impact the drive for revenue?
Yeah, so all successful firms are driven by revenue, but firms that are successful over time have a framework that balances that drive for revenue with an understanding that risk can destroy all future objectives. And risk management provides a framework for success, and it puts insurance into context. So I think it's important to know just a basic 3-step risk management process. And the first step's the most important. If you don't know what you're up against, you can't do anything to protect yourself. And that's kind of why we're here today. So identification is critical. And once you are able to identify some of the key impacts and exposures of your law firm, then you can go on to determine how are you going to control that risk. We can no longer avoid cyber risk, so how are we going to minimize the frequency, reduce the severity, contractually transfer, and how are we going to pay for that with insurance, and then implement and monitor those plans and programs. Risk gets complex very quickly, and in order to get your head around it, you need a way to break it down. So if you look at these logical classes of risk, it can help you kind of put these into categories. So if we were looking at, let's say, human resources, Sony settled a lawsuit, multi-million-dollar lawsuit for negligence in failing to protect employee information. So loss of protected employee information is certainly on the radar here when it comes to human resources. When you're looking at liability, It could be liability arising from a breach or maybe a breach of a non-disclosure agreement. It could be the cost of defending a regulatory proceeding if you're dealing with protected health information, Office of Civil Rights. So legal defense and settlement costs arising from the failure to prevent unauthorized access are certainly in line with your liability bucket here. And then when you start to look at net income and property, so net income is indirect loss. Your standard business interruption insurance policy is triggered by physical damage to tangible property. Cyber is not physical, so your standard business interruption policy is not going to trigger. And we're looking at the cost to repair network systems, lost profit, and extra expense to get back up and running. So think about billable hours and lost work that could be insured. And then finally, property, you're looking at the cost of regulatory fines and penalties that David mentioned, notification cost, my apologies, to affected individuals, and public relations to minimize damage to a firm's reputation. Computer forensics, very important to know what happened, extremely expensive, and you need these specialists on a moment's notice. And then potentially the cost of a ransom. One thing I'd mention briefly about property is that there's three types of property. So there's tangible property, your office furniture, computer hardware. There's intangible property, such as your data, brand value, intellectual property, and then there's your money. And law firms need to understand that Regulation E protects consumers for fraud on their accounts. Businesses do not have that same protection. So if there's a failure of security and that rests upon the law firm, be prepared to pay for those cybercrime losses against your bank account. And that includes fraudulent transfers and business email compromise. That can be insurable, but you need to be able to recognize and identify your exposures. And then finally, if you're looking at the two sides of cyber insurance, cyber insurance is essentially kind of a catch-all for a lot of technology risk. And on the liability side, you're looking at privacy injury, so dealing with confidential or protected information and financial loss to a third party due to negligence or errors. And it could be the misuse or disclosure or even the wrongful collection of information. Failure to notify or comply with your privacy policy or privacy regulatory scheme, whatever the state is. And in California, where I'm at right now, if you have over 500 records that are unencrypted, you need to notify the state attorney general's office. Another piece of third-party liability is media. So we're all publishers, we're all on the internet these days, so disparagement of another company's products, services, libel, infringement on copyright, trademark can be picked up under cyber. And then finally, network security. And if you get an email and that infects your system, you click on the wrong link and it goes out and sends an email to your clients and they click on that and they get infected, you can be liable for the damages that you've caused by dissemination of a virus. It could also extend to denial of access or failure to prevent unauthorized access. And just to wrap up real quickly, on the first party side, these are costs that law firms could incur if they have a cyber incident. So the cost of forensics to determine what happened, the cost to notify affected individuals, set up a call center, credit card monitoring, and even pay for regulatory fines and penalties. And of course, business interruption costs for lost billable hours and repair of network systems due to even an administrative error, or if you rely on a third-party cloud provider and they go down due to a covered loss, that can also affect your operations as well. So that's kind of like cyber in a nutshell, looking at both first and third party.
Howard,
Thanks, Howard.
or Steve, Howard, just to throw a point out here.
Yeah.
It's very complicated when you have a breach. This is one of the things that, doesn't necessarily occur to people, is that when you have a breach, there's a lot of moving parts and it gets really expensive really fast.
Yeah.
So this is where the insurance companies really have been shining in terms of being able to have resources that can come to assist you with the right thing to do. And, when you look at the cost of coverage against what you get, it's a very big upside. So it's really something to have part of your risk portfolio.
Yeah, I had a law firm call me yesterday, and we were filling out the renewal application for their cyber liability insurance. And there was a question about any unauthorized access. And I started to hear a story about how someone got into their email system and set up some rules and started forwarding emails to who knows where. And they said they put in a ticket with their IT provider. So this is not a ticket situation. This is an incident response. And you need to work with the right partners. And that includes the right IT and InfoSec and the right bank and insurance, so that if something happens, you can respond. Because the sooner you respond and the better your incident response plan, the lower the cost. And I think half the value of a cyber liability insurance policy is those pre-arranged resources that come into play, whether it's a forensic specialist, a breach coach, specialized legal assistance to determine if you need to notify and who and how quickly, and that type of thing. So I definitely agree with you, David.
David, that's a good point, and it brings up a question I was going to follow up with Howard. So we're talking about costs. So who within the firm is making these decisions on how much to spend, and how do we get partners and upper management in the firm to sign off on spending the money for what you need, the policies you need to cover what you need to cover with insurance? And I'll open that up to anybody on the panel who can answer, who has a thought on it.
Well, I would say one point, there's a new regulatory scheme evolving right now, and I think the CCPA is kind of leading the way. So where before consumers were saying, hey, we're trying to prove that we were damaged by this breach, now we have statutory damages coming up in California from $100 to $750 per record per incident. So if you have 10,000 records that are breached, you can do the math. That can affect the amount of insurance you want. Also, your downtime. If you get hit by ransomware and you're down, how much is that going to cost your firm? And how quickly can you recover your RPO and RTO? So you start to kind of look at these scenarios and look and start to quantify some of these costs, and then relate that to how much insurance you need.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, so now we'll turn over to Michael. Michael's going to tell us how we recognize the threats and protect ourselves from the threats coming in.
Let's clarify one thing that I think that was just said. We tend to use a lot of acronyms in this industry, so I want to get this one out there when I just heard it. And by the way, good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending. Recovery time objective and recovery point objective. How old's my data? And to what point can I retrieve it from was the point. So let's talk generally about sort of InfoSec management and what vendors do. Our firm does a number of things, and I thought I'd share this guidance, hoping that it'd be helpful regardless of who the outside vendors are, and whether it's someone like us, a managed services and cloud provider, or even a direct third party. Vendors that provide professional services absolutely must have their own information security management practices and procedures in place. And they've got to take security in their own environments as seriously as they do for their clients. Patching is not optional. For years, we'd harden an image, right? And so what I mean by that is we'd create a desktop image, get it ready, and once you spend all the time on it and customize it and you roll it, it's just absolutely perfect. And everyone would look at that at the time and say, well, now that we spent so much time and effort on this, nobody wants to touch it. And unfortunately, in an environment now where we have all these security concerns, those things just cannot be left alone. So all devices in the environment must be patched. They've got to do that has to be done on a recurring and timely basis. And the idea there is that you're eliminating new vulnerabilities and exploits constantly. This includes firmware updates. It includes firewalls, routers, switches, printers, servers, everything in the environment. And on top of that, once everything is patched with some recurring regularity, the environment should be scanned to validate that all those things are current, and then you can trust both the vendor and the systems that are patching those things. The next is that businesses that provide managed services, we rely on numerous third-party solutions, both software and partners, and it's critical that those relationships and those associated solutions be vetted, and that those vendors meet our combined expectations around rigorous security standards, so that they're following us and they're being employed on behalf of clients as well. And then finally, maintaining expertise. Maintaining expertise is so critical. As an information technology services partner, it's growing more and more. And when you look at the pace with which technology is continuing to exponentially advance and change, clients depend on us, they depend on their partners to maintain knowledge and training. Not only because we're providing critical guidance and ensuring that client environments are current and secure, but also when looking at things like cloud computing, moving those resources to external sources, it's just a vastly different view and look on the way things are done, and everything from security practices to implementation and support has to absolutely evolve with it.
And if I can chime in on that point, Michael, it's interesting as we move to Amazon, because in the early days, we moved to cloud providers. If you didn't configure a system properly, all your data was immediately accessible on the internet, and there are still configurations like this. What do you do to train and prepare your staff for understanding this new paradigm?
Well, first of all, we spent years in research and development getting our own cloud solution baked and proper, and that continues to evolve. Things like two-factor authentication and security methods, and locking down and tightening down those solutions. But then on a recurring basis, we will both internally train and send engineers to, whether it's web-based or on-premise training, et cetera, not only with the cloud providers, but also with the tools. I see Fortinet, Mimecast, Microsoft, et cetera. All of those vendors we have preferred partnerships with, and regularly on a recurrent basis train and support our engineers around them.
And I think this goes to a big deal in recognizing the cyber threat. A lot of times when we participate in responding to an incident where someone's actually hacked, we go in and we don't have the right logging or monitoring. And that's specifically a function of two things. One is it's the folks in IT not understanding how to set up these systems with these built-in tools, right? They're, just part of, if you're in a cloud solution and you've done it right, you have this logging and monitoring that makes all the difference. And Howard, you can attest, right, when you get to the attorney and we're going to make a decision whether we're going to do a breach notification. If you have logs that show no data went out, that's a whole different story than, hey, we don't know what happened, right?
Right, absolutely. But the other question I have maybe for Michael is about the location of the data. With GDPR, where your data is stored and transmitted can be a legal issue, and how you address that with law firms.
It's interesting. We use, David mentioned Amazon. I'll use that example. Amazon has what they call regions and availability zones, so that they actually parse data in specific locations throughout the world. Right. For U.S.-based law firms, we will only use the U.S. West, which is Oregon, and U.S. East, which is Virginia locations. But we have other examples where we have global firms. And using GDPR as an example, we have an AmLaw 100 firm where we're in the midst of a project, and that's going to involve hosting data in Germany only. Right. So, sure, you have to be intelligent around regulation and around local requirements, and then also deal with it from a collaboration perspective.
And this goes back to where the training is important, because when we come in and do assessments, a lot of times folks have not turned on the logging, so we can't go back and figure out what happened. More importantly, no one's monitoring the logging. So we can't see an anomalous behavior. And we've dealt with a few in the past month situations where email has been compromised, primarily going back to that first attack vector, the phishing attack. Very simple attack, right? So, you know, following it through, someone clicks on a link, hey, give me your credentials, someone gets into the email, right? In this particular instance, the perpetrator was in the email for 47 minutes, and yet thousands of people are still going to need to be notified. The ability to monitor and get alerts in these situations is critical. So it's very important to know that that's in place. Now, the other thing that comes in is the training, the vigilant users. In the instance I'm talking about, this user typed in their password to the phishing attack and then like 30 minutes later said, oh, that's not right. And so IT was very, very quickly able to lock it down. And then we get to these advanced tools. Tools like Mimecast and Microsoft have advanced security measures that do things like rewrite the links in your email so that before your user can go somewhere, it gets checked by the security vendor to say, hey, does this look bad? Or they scan your attachments. Now, you know, as Steve can probably attest to from his position, anti-malware solutions don't catch everything. The only real way to catch something is to sandbox it, to actually open it in a pristine environment and go, is it doing something? And that's what these advanced tools are doing now. So that's where you want to, you know, have a conversation with your IT vendor or your IT department and go, you know, do we have advanced visibility? Do we have things that are like intrusion detection, looking for these patterns and behaviors that might give us a hint that something's going on? Because the average amount of time, Steve, do you know the latest, you know, in your journalist role, do you know the latest statistic of average amount of time to finding a breach? Last I looked, it was like 9 or 10 months.
I think it might be 6 months, I think I heard lately. But
getting better.
But not too much different. Yeah, it's getting better, but still
awesome.
Not nearly quick enough. Yeah.
Not awesome. All right.
Yeah.
One more comment on the advanced tools.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's quite typical that standard, what I'll call antivirus vendors that depend on virus signatures, when those base products get installed, they won't recognize ransomware. And when ransomware actually gets a hold of the machine and attempts, you know, what I'll call unauthorized behaviors, more advanced software will actually see the software attempting to perform those behaviors and not allow them, rather than just depending on signatures. So it's critical that that piece be there as well.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, so we talk about, you know, educating people, and, you know, you can tell your employees till you're blue in the face, hey, look out for these kind of emails, and let the IT department know before you click on anything, but people are still going to do it. And they're looking so real that even people who you think should know better click on links that they shouldn't, because, you know, and I've gotten emails where I call whoever it's from. I think I got one supposedly from Netflix. And I was like, you know, it looks real, but I'm going to call them because I'm not 100% sure. And it turned out to be real, but they said, oh, I'm glad you called because there are emails out there that look pretty good that is not us. And you click on a link and, you know, all of a sudden they're in your system. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and anybody on the panel can address, is people with their own devices. People have their own cell phones, their own smart devices, their own tablets. They bring into the office all the time. They work on them on the weekends or you know, at night or whatever. What can we do to kind of rein those in? Because that is a whole vast array of machines that are out there and devices that are out there that are not necessarily protected the way, you know, those that are given out by the company or the firm can be.
I'll take it. There's a category of software called mobile device management, MDM being the acronym. And what one can do is restrict access to environment unless it's accessible through MDM software. So effectively, it has the ability to containerize or put a section of software on the smartphone that allows access to the environment with, you know, whatever the applications are that are being used, but only through that container and only with the firm's applications. And in addition, should somebody depart from a firm, you can destroy the applications that are within that container rather than destroying everything that's on the phone and, you know, toasting their photos, etc.
And let me take this a step back, because I know Debra's going to talk a bit about, you know, client requirements. We're seeing, so first of all, if somebody brings their device, their mobile device or their laptop and puts it on your network, you don't know where it's been. There's a good chance that someone's 12-year-old son or daughter is playing some sort of game and has done some unsafe practice, and that is now with access to your system. So tools like Michael's describing are really important. The other thing is clients are more and more demanding that you have these controls, which basically does mean machines don't go on your network unless they're at the same level of security as your other machines, and we use software like mobile device management to achieve it.
I would just add having policies from an HR standpoint, acceptable use of technology in your handbook can be also very important to show due diligence and make it clear to the employees that utilize technology that connects with your network.
Great, thank you. All right, let's turn to, as David mentioned, Debra is now going to go through what clients are expecting of law firms now. Clients obviously hear all about cybersecurity. They hear about these breaches that hit the news every day. So they're asking questions. And how are you protecting my data? What's going on? So Debra, what kind of demands are clients making for law firms or of law firms?
Yep, thank you very much. So what I did is I went back to when Frandzel received its first security audit, and that was in 2013. It was one page and it had 9 simple questions.
Good old
pretty
days.
Simple.
Have you been briefed? No, okay.
In 2018, we received 6 audits. The longest being they were all over 100 pages, and the longest had 700 questions. So that tells you just in a short period of time how advanced and quickly our clients are responding to security concerns that are out there. I will also add that all of the audits that we received, all of the security requirements were embedded in the outside counsel guidelines. So if you're not reading your outside counsel guidelines, you need to be, because most of these requirements are going to be embedded in their documents in some form or fashion. Just make sure you're reading those, because that's where they all have been for us. Also, I wanted to add that basic security requirements are almost a given now, and these include 2-factor authentication, longer, stronger passwords, mobile device management. These are all items that are a given now that we must do. So the clients are getting a lot more, they're requesting a lot more security measures to keep their information safe. We've also seen an uptick, of course, in the security audits. They were every other year, every 3rd year. Now they're coming in every year, and sometimes they're doing self-assessments on a quarterly basis. So they are coming in very fast and furious now. Clients are also asking for documented security policies, and all of our clients want a copy of our documented security policies. So they are taking this very seriously. They are asking us for documented incident response plans. So how quickly are we going to respond once we know that there's a breach? We also have a few clients that have said, here's how fast you will respond if there's a breach. And they've given us specific numbers that we have to call and specific people that we must contact if there is a breach. So they've got a dedicated plan on their side as well on who we have to call and the items that we must follow. In addition to that, they've also asked for our business continuity plan. This is not something that we had to build. So that, again, just shows you the level of sophistication from our client side. A couple of years ago, our clients were asking us to do pen testing on our system, and it was every year. Our clients have now mandated, and not requested, they've certainly mandated that we bump it up to quarterly. And some firms are asking for copies of the scans. And even if we don't send it to them, we are required to have these done on a quarterly basis. So again, it just adds to the requirements that we need to do. They've also tackled it from a person side, and what I mean by that is they're really tackling it and asking us to include more training for our staff, not just lawyers, but everybody. So we, once a year, bring in someone to do security awareness training. And also twice a year, we do phishing defense training. And I will say that the first year that we did the phishing defense training, we had a 75% fail rate, which was terrible. And everyone said, these emails look so real, and they do. They look very real. And so every 6 months or so, we send out a phishing defense training expedition, and the numbers do get better every year. So this is a huge help in just training our staff and lawyers in just trying to get a sense of what these emails look like. The newest item on the horizon is the classification of inventory. Our clients want to know the type of information that they have. And you think, well, they should know what type of information we have, but these are different departments asking for this information, so they don't necessarily know what we have. So we have to start labeling our information in the different categories that is required. So they want to know exactly how many financial records and personal records going from, confidential to non-confidential. So this is something that we're having to tackle now, is what type of information do we have and how much do we have? So this is certainly a new area that I've seen on requirements from clients. And then the last item on the next slide, please, is we've seen an uptick in background checks for our employees. Our clients are mandating that all employees have background checks, and not just your typical litigation check. They're looking for credit checks, civil, criminal checks. They're asking us to drug screen. They're asking for bankruptcy checks, and then for any lawyers, all schools verified. So the level of background checks that we are required to do now has expanded over the last probably 2 years. Some of our clients have asked for the background checks. If the lawyer is going to be working on their documents, then they want to see the background checks, and of course we redact what we need to, but they want to know who we're hiring and who is going to be looking at their information. So this has also been a very large area of increase that we're seeing that is mandated by our clients. So lots of good information, and certainly has been, this has certainly been keeping me busy over the last few years. So Steve, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I was going to, one of the other things that we've heard a lot about over the last 2 years, maybe a little less, are firms hiring people to come in and kind of do like tests, like phishing tests, where they'll send a bogus email out and just to see, you know, how it does. If people click on the links, if people don't click on the links. Are you guys seeing more of that, or hiring people to come in and help do that?
So Steve, on the what I've called the phishing expeditions, that's what those are, and that's what we do every 6 months. We have a we have someone that sends out a bogus email, and they are very enticing. And we then get statistics on click rates, who's clicked on it, who hasn't. And then after the statistics come out, then the first time the group was so large that we ended up having a meeting and just talking about the email and going through what made them click on it. The second one that we did, it was a much smaller group, so I just went around individually and asked them, okay, tell me what made you click on this? And then we talked about it just on an individual level. And so I think every time we send one of these out, the click rate does get better. But the couple of things that I've noticed that these emails always play on people's emotions. And so people get very wrapped up in the emails that they've won an Amazon gift card, someone's monitoring their emails, and again, it plays onto their emotions, and those are what seem to get people's attention.
Or the IRS. That's a good one too. I get that one a lot. The IRS is auditing your account. Click on this and make.
That's right. That one too would get someone's attention.
So you're finding that when you do this and then you go back to the people, like you had that one big meeting, and then it dropped considerably after when you did the next test. Is it because you had the first one and you had the meeting, and do you think, or can you get a sense of whether that was the case, that they did learn from the first time it went around, and maybe they're just scared to do it, and so that's giving them a level of hesitation at least?
Well, I think it's certainly after the first one, it certainly brought to light when we went through the email, it just gave them some basic information and education. And then on the second one, they were a little bit more hesitant, and I received certainly a lot more phone calls on, did you send this email? Because it looks funny and it didn't really look like language that you would send. So there were a lot more questions, and even now I get a lot more emails from our lawyers and staff asking, did you send this email out? I'm not so sure. Can you look at this? So certainly from a human perspective, the training is helping 90%, which is huge in our case.
And that's a good thing, right? That you get bothered with these questions and calls, and you don't mind.
I always welcome these questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Another thing to add that I've noticed is people respond to forward an email internally, and they'll say, "Hey, is this legitimate?" No. Pick up the phone.
Yeah, you're just forwarding the bad email around to more people.
Right.
Let me see if this is legit. Let me click on this link and see if it is.
In the meantime, the wire's been processed.
And there's a number of tricks that folks use. We've had clients where somebody opened up a domain name that, looked like your domain name, but was missing an I. So it's very similar, and the emails are going back and forth, and they write back, "Hey, is this really you?" Like Michael said. And guess what? The hacker said, "Oh, it's really me." And if they've been in your email, if they've hacked into your email at all, there can be rules where we had one situation where a client's client was compromised, and they were having this fake conversation, but all the real emails were going to a subfolder. So never saw the real emails, but the hacker had full access to all of those real emails. So it all read just right. All the address was right. All the phone numbers were right. So it gets very sophisticated, especially when there's a lot of money involved.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. We have some time left for questions. So those of you out there, if you have any questions, type them in. And while we're waiting for that, I'll just open up the panel. If there's anything else you wanted to add that we haven't actually covered during the course, or what takeaways can people listening take away from the session, and what steps they can do next?
I'll just throw a question over to David. David, you see what law firms are getting faced with on a daily basis. Anything else that you wanted to add from a security standpoint, and that I did not necessarily add in terms of client security requirements?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest deal is having those policies and standards that you talked about. That if those are based on, an appropriate framework, and we've got, a bunch of acronyms and numbers for that, International Standards Organization or NIST, those types of things. That's one of the very first most important steps. I did want to echo on what you said about this disaster recovery business continuity plan, because it's really important. Michael talked about availability zones in Amazon. A lot of times when folks put stuff in the cloud or even on their own servers, they're not thinking about what happens if it goes away. If there's an incident, if there's a fire, if there's an earthquake. And it's really important from a business survivability perspective to have those plans and to have folks who are going to help you get it back together if something bad happens.
Okay.
Yeah, all right, good point. Yep.
Thank you.
I have a question for Debra. You're talking about the fishing expeditions. Do you recommend, or is it worth having some type of carrot and stick behind how employees and staff behave when they answer those emails?
Well, certainly this is a new area for us, and we started off pretty basic with the fishing expeditions. As we continue to do these, our expeditions will get a little bit more sophisticated. So what we talked about at the beginning when we first did it, our staff is looking out for those things now. And again, with the second fishing expedition we did, again, they're a little bit more leery. So I think as we continue to do these, they will certainly get a little bit more sophisticated so that we can continue to educate folks on how tricky these people are getting. And certainly I get a ton of phishing emails, and so I use the phishing emails that I get to my personal Gmail account as examples as well. And as we continue to do training, people will also add items that they've received. So it's just a continuous training that we need to do in order to make sure that our staff is not the reason for any breach.
But to the carrot and the stick example, does the person that clicks on the largest number of links have to buy lunch, and does the one that clicks on the fewest, the recipient of the lunch?
Well, I try not to point any direct fingers when we're doing these lunches, because a good portion, well, never mind.
You said lunches.
I don't want to say who is clicking on them, but we try and keep the finger pointing anonymous, just for an education, and I don't want to shame anyone yet.
Yet.
Well, I mean, as long as the numbers are dropping, that works, I guess, right?
Yes.
I think that's a good point, because we've had somebody in our office just a couple of years ago click on something, and it was a ransomware attack, and they got our data, and fortunately we had backups. Our IT, just in our local Philadelphia office of ALM, he had a backup separately from the company that was done, I think, maybe every week. So maybe we were a week behind in the data that we were able to recover, but we were able to recover everything without having to pay the ransom for the ransomware. But it was somebody who was a reporter and with the company for, again, 10, 12 years, and should have known better, and just didn't. It just, whatever it was, she didn't even know why she clicked it. It was just, she said to me, I just clicked it. And then once that happened, it was so without pointing fingers, anybody can be susceptible to that. Anybody can fall victim to it, even people who you would think would know better.
I think the thing to realize, and maybe we can close with this thought and share it, but I think the thing to realize is security is a multi-layered approach, right? So definitely. Yes, there's definitely human training, but there's also technology, to help them save them from themselves. and doing all those things and keeping things patched and current. The solution to all this is the sum of all the parts, not just one.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It's critical, and I'm happy. I'm thrilled that we did this, because I think awareness is the entrance, right? And once the awareness
Absolutely.
is there, then there's a willingness to collaborate and invest and address it, in a combined approach.
Yeah, education is key. They can throw, the smartest looking phishing expedition email, can't defeat an educated user who knows better than to click on something. And that's like you said, but there's more layers than just that. To, even if you do fall victim to it, there should be security measures in place to help the organization be protected from that kind of attack. I don't see any questions coming in, so I guess I'll just close and thank everybody for joining us. Thank Debra, David, Howard, and Michael. There is a video will be available of the session. It's been recorded, and the link will be sent out to all the attendees. So again, thank everybody for attending, and thank you, panelists, for joining us. And everybody have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Michael, Debra, Steve, David.